Hello, my name is Veeksha Balasa. I recently graduated from UCLA with a bachelor's in psychobiology and a minor in disability studies. Through my senior capstone, I chose to focus my research on the population characterized by the intersection of migration and disability. Through working with Dr. Lacey Abrego in the UCLA Chicanx Studies Department, I performed an in-depth literature review, ran numerous case studies, and analyzed immigration policy dating back to the 1800s in order to investigate the targeting of migrants with disabilities by the U.S. immigration regime. The issues present at the intersection of migration and disability have only been given minimal attention. However, the inequities this population faces are nothing new. I have reported on how disability-based discrimination has long been embedded in legislation to complicate admission for migrants with disabilities and dictate their entire way of life. My research further examines the consequences that having a disability has on access to social services, the victimizing of migrants with disabilities in ICE detention centers, and the psychological disability that immigration and detention practices engender in detainees. An estimated 14%, or 1 out of 7, of the world's population identifies as having a disability. This is evident in the fact that people with disabilities comprise the largest minority group across borders. While the exact number remains unclear, it is estimated that the number of migrants with disabilities either residing in the US or currently detained in ICE immigration centers is in the thousands. In order to examine the long-standing disability-based discrimination ingrained in U.S. immigration policy, it is vital to consider the public charge rule. The public charge concept was first implemented by Congress in 1882 as a legal means of denying a U.S. visa to migrants who were likely to, at any point in their life, require public benefits. In February of 2020, the Trump administration redefined this regulation. We are expanding non-admission criteria to include previously excluded social services relating to health, housing, and nutrition, in order to further exclude migrants on the basis of public charge. The radical redefinition of the rule particularly targets migrants with disabilities and their families, who most often seek admission to the U.S. to gain access to vital services and treatments that are unavailable in their native country. Families are therefore faced with a cruel, impossible choice, whether to access life-saving social services for themselves or their children and risk family separation and deportation, or to refrain from these services and jeopardize their loved ones' health and well-being. Disability-based discrimination has been established in the U.S. since colonial times, initially as a means of creating a physically adept, adequate labor source to serve in an agrarian economy. Over the next 200 years, the public charge concept would be repeatedly amended in order to further attempt to deny entrance to migrants with disabilities. In May of 1999, formal guidance was issued to define a public charge as someone who was primarily dependent on the government for subsistence, institutionalization, or long-term care, services which people with disabilities most often depend on for survival. This guidance initially excluded programs such as Medicaid, unemployment insurance, housing benefits, and food stamps and non-admission criteria. However, the most updated form of the rule under the Trump administration includes social services relating to health, housing, and nutrition as grounds for being considered as a public charge, leaving migrants with disabilities to suffer. While the public charge rule is legally not authorized to be used as grounds for removal in cases of migrants seeking asylum, the stories of thousands of migrants with disabilities demonstrate otherwise. For instance, take the story of a young girl named Sammy. Sammy was born with a rare brain disorder known as lissencephaly, which requires complex treatments for a chance at survival, urging her parents to legally seek refuge in the U.S. in order to gain access to these life-saving treatments for their child. Despite immigration officers' knowledge of her disability, Sammy was separated from her parents and placed in a hielera, detention centers notorious for their freezing temperatures. She has a life expectancy of 10 years and has now spent close to half of her 7th year in detention. Another case is the story of Rosa Maria Hernandez, a 10-year-old suffering from cerebral palsy who was in need of a crucial surgery in order to survive. Desperate for help, her parents rushed her to a hospital in Texas, only for their ambulance to be followed by ICE agents who subsequently waited outside her operating room, refusing to allow for even the doors to be closed. When her surgery was completed, the family was separated, and Rosa Maria was detained, her condition left to exacerbate in ICE detention centers. For over 200 years, the U.S. administration has punished migrants and their families for having disabilities, and the disability-based discrimination by the U.S. immigration regime far from ceases upon having gained admission. ICE facilities across the U.S. have been reported for malpractice towards detainees with disabilities, notably the Shiloh Treatment Center in Manvel, Texas, In 2018, this ICE facility was reported for forcing detained girls with developmental disabilities to fight for snacks. The following year, the same center was reported for administering dangerous combinations of unwarranted psychotropic medications to detained children with disabilities. In one case, this resulted in a child gaining 100 pounds in less than a year. The center is still running. The Americans with Disabilities Act was a civil rights law enacted to prohibit discrimination towards individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life. Reports show, however, that ICE facilities are most often non-compliant to ADA policy. A recent report of an ICE facility in Port Isabel, Texas, discussed a deaf man who was separated from his grandmother and then detained. He was subsequently placed in handcuffs, prohibiting his right to communication by denying his ability to sign. Thousands of migrants with disabilities seeking asylum have instead become the victims of what scholars refer to as legal violence, the harmful consequences on the physical and emotional well-being of migrants that occur due to law. In order to better understand the gravity of the situation, the psychological disability that legal violence engenders must be given attention. To begin, it's estimated that 10 to 15% of children of immigrants living in the U.S. exhibit symptoms of depression, an unsurprising statistic considering the constant stress these children face, from fear of deportation of themselves or worse, that of their parents. Numerous research on citizen children of undocumented parents evinces that this population also suffers a great burden of anxiety, depression, attention problems, social withdrawal, and rule-breaking behaviors, which have been linked to long-term emotional and behavioral problems, such as substance abuse, unemployment, and interpersonal difficulties. When it comes to detained children, studies illustrate that children exhibit the aforementioned symptoms, including anxiety and depression, after only a few weeks in detention. Many of them additionally show symptoms of oppositional defiant disorder, behavioral regression, and suicidal ideation. Even infants demonstrate symptoms, often reverting to breastfeeding following the trauma. And adults are just as affected, with one study illustrating that 90% of adults in detention exhibited symptoms of anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Thousands of migrants with disabilities have for too long been the victims of a cruel immigration system, forced to endure inhumane practices as a consequence for seeking asylum. Having a disability does not make someone less human, does not exempt a person from the human right of asylum, and does not justify becoming a victim of legal violence. It is time that attention is given to the humans in the intersection of disability and immigration. Thank you for your time.